Yamai, my, my. Yamai, my, my. Yamai, my, 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 my. Yamai, Sama lecha nafshi, kama lecha b'sari, b'eretz yaveh below mayim. Yamai, Yamai, Nafshi, my soul is thirsty. Kama lecha b'sari, my flesh yearns for you. Be'eretz tziyah v'ayef b'limayim, in a thirsty, weary land with no water. Still, Kain ba'kodesh chaziticha. Nevertheless, I can see you. Ba'kodesh, in that which is holy. Lirot uzcha chodecha, to witness your power and your glory that fills everything, even this thirsty, parched land. Psalm 63. So, I think I did that. Okay. So, down in the dumps with me. He right, not just Yitro. Oh, come on, give me a break. Jethro? Who is he that he thinks he gets to have just father-in-laws? Terrible. They think they can do everything. So by what right, what's going on there? And he says that Jethro taught Moshe about Yeter. And the important piece is Vayishma Yitro. He listened, and then there was more. And the sequence of what he's teaching is that first you have to listen for God's voice in Torah before you can know what Torah is saying. Vayishma Yitro. Sheiter Parashat Achad. And he cites this verse from Psalm 62. Achat diber Elohim et shtayim zo shamati. Right? God spoke one thing, and I heard two. Right? So what he does with that, he says, first you have to hear achat, and then you can get to the yeter, then you can get to shtayim. Includes there that this is the Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf. Right? God's voice at Sinai was a great voice, V'lo Yasaf. JPS translates in its classical way, right? And there was no more. Right? But our tradition is V'lo Yasaf, and it didn't stop. It went on. So that Kol is there for us to hear. Listening deeply to Torah requires that we learn to listen deeply, period. To let go of preconceptions, to leave off preference and prejudice, to attend, to allow, to open to welcome what is present now when I'm listening, to be true to what is here and now. Yahavit, right? I have written myself into Torah. And you'll never So let's sit and listen, paying attention to God arising, unfolding in this breath, in this body, in this community. in our own unique ways. May we, in this beloved community, in this community of spiritual seekers, of spiritual practitioners, of people with heart wanting to know God, may we hear God's voice speaking in us, through us. May God be felt deeply in our hearts, so that it manifests in every word we read in Torah. Amen. I suspect, Mark, that this also goes back to perhaps that first retreat of the first cohort. Art Green, quoting from First Chronicles, Hitalalu b'shem kodsho is maklev mevakshe Adonai dirshu Adonai v'uzo bakshu panav tamid. Praise God's holiness. Let the heart of those who seek and it's about being seekers. Mevakshe Adonai. Seeking to live in the divine presence. When Rachel Cowan was tasked by Cummings Foundation, it was really quite young at that point. He was tasked by Charlie Halpin when Rachel was tasked with bringing Jewish mystical teachings and practices to the Jewish community. She turned to her friend and HUC classmate, Nancy Flam. Together they had brainstormed and come up with the Healing Center. And now Nancy, recently moved back to the East Coast, was available to brainstorm once again, to meet with prominent scholars, teachers, and practitioners to figure out, how do we do this? Charlie didn't just come up with this. Partly it was a reflection of generational change within the Cummings Foundation. Nathan Cummings grew up in a traditional household, lived a traditional conservative life, raised his kids in America, very successful due to all of us and our kiddishes, right? Through Sarah Lee. Right? Nobody doesn't like. But the younger generation was beginning to look elsewhere. They had other Jewish concerns. As the program officer, because Jewish mystical tradition, spiritual teachings, I believe, about the environment. And Charlie cornered them and said, "What's the deal? Why doesn't anybody know this?" And their answer was, because we're academics, we train doctoral students who will go on to teach other doctoral students. They'll write great books that nobody will read. Charlie said, "Rachel, do something." So the purpose of the Institute was to bring Jewish spiritual teachings and practice to the mainstream of Jewish life, to provide the resources, the background, the teachings, the orientation, the conceptions, the dispositions, the theologies of Jewish spirituality, which had been so long ignored in the Jewish world, for the sake of all Jews. Now, it's true that the Cummings Foundation had dabbled a little bit with some of the anti-cult organizations that grew up in the 80s. But this is already the 90s. Cults were beginning to already pass, right? Jack Kornfield has been to the East. He's trained Sylvia Boorstein. She's already teaching. It's not as if they've got these people flocking to the East anymore. It's not about keeping Jews from becoming Buddhist. It's about, we have an authentic tradition of deep spiritual insight and practice was disregarded through the 19th century, into the 20th century, in all the schools that we were trained in, most of them maybe, throughout, the people who taught us were all raised in Wissenschaft schools. That's what was going on. That would have been problematic. Bless him. Long life, great productivity. Art can communicate what he knows. That art became the primary teacher meant that we worked out of Hasidut, and not so hard. That we were introduced through him to a non-dualistic theology and spirituality, grounded in practice. The practice that we were introduced to in that first cohort by Sylvia Boorstein, but which grew and developed as Sheila took over from the second cohort onward, that she knew was not for us to become conversant in Buddhism. It was to offer a practice to ground what we were studying so that they were tied together. I've said this many times, and once again, what we've received in the printed texts of Hasidut are important spiritual insights to which the response is yes, but how? Vipassana meditation, mindfulness meditation, offers a how that when we read it and experience it with the Hasidic texts, brings them to life and gives us access to parts of that spirituality that might otherwise not be available to us. The Chabad tradition is one of the few places where that lineage is preserved in writing, whereas in other communities it was transmitted orally and is not as accessible. So what we're doing in the Institute is a hybrid in the sense of bringing this mindfulness meditation, which is not natively Jewish, to Jewish life, and pairing it with Hasidut, which is inspiring, but has the potential, if we only study the texts, to do what we do best: go to the head, teach ideas, get everybody to be talking Hasidut, and still living, as it were, in the material world as a material girl. I had this with a moment with Yael Sadoff, who taught from the Derech HaMelech last year, where she was put in a footnote something that that had to do with what the Piaseczner was saying, and she quoted, of course, Madonna. He said, "Wait a minute, Yael, let's go back to the source, George Harrison." So how do we keep from just making this ideas? How do we remind ourselves over and over again that this is about lived experience, grounded in the world, and not just nice ideas that we then betray over and over again because we go with the flow of what everybody else is doing? So Art is, God bless him, 82, or turning 82. So he was at the front end of the 60s. I was at the tail end of the 60s. Enough of that generation that that we recognize as well and understand and promote what we're doing as counterculture. That it is intended to uproot, invert, subvert, and change how we live. And say to the dominant culture, no, there's another way. We can do this better. We can be more humane. We can be more human. We can be more real. We can be more loving. We can not destroy the earth. We cannot destroy each other. So what are some of the elements of that spirituality that have been central to our work? So one is the capacity, as we began, for deep listening, for the divine voice. Sitting quietly introduces us to the maniac on a megaphone, trapped in the phone booth in our heads. Thank you, Sheila. That then allows us to stop and say, do I have to believe that? Do I even have to listen to it? It may be hearing the mockingbird. It may be hearing the fly. It may be hearing the leaf blower, whatever it is. But now I have the freedom to choose what I listen to and where I place my attention so that I can hear the divine voice in everything. Because from everything, God calls out. in the depths of the pagan capital, that's where we'll find God. So God is everywhere, not just on retreat, not in Simi Valley, or only in Simi Valley. But we will only know that God is there when we learn to listen and cultivate the capacity to listen and listen deeply. Because God will speak to us from wherever we turn our attention if we pay attention. Partners, your spouses, your kids, that you're going on a silent retreat with 40 other rabbis and cantors, and they look at you and say, what a joke. Can't do that. Jews don't do that. Once we begin telling everybody what we think, but what we really mean is telling everybody what they should think, and begin to listen, then we can begin to pray. And pray in particular as contemplative prayer. We have inherited that Latinate word prayer and its various forms in the popular culture. It's not at all foreign to Jews, but it tells us that prayer is precare, pleading, gimme, 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 have. That's how God hears it. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Before we can say perhaps what really we need, perhaps and so Shekhinah, presence, Malchut, Peh, Shekhinah, Eshet Ish. She is God's beloved partner. Adonai Sfatai Tiftach. Aleph Shin Tav Eshet. Shekhinah Midaberet Mitoch Rono Shel Moshe. Shekhinah speaks from Moses's throat. If we become quiet enough and turn our attention to meet God in the temple of our own hearts, Shekhinah may speak through us as well. And we might discover something quite different of what prayer is. That prayer could be the alignment of heart, soul, body, and mind with divinity. That flow, what we look for on the Peloton bike, what we look for out, right, when we're swimming laps, right? Flow, which we look for when we have really practiced and then it all comes together. Flow could be what we actually cultivate through spiritual practice and sense the divine flow through us. But we have to practice. Practice listening before we begin to speak. We have the gift of non-dualistic theology, not as an idea, but as an experience. So what are the elements of that? One is non-separation and interdependence. If there is nothing but God, that means that there's no inside, no outside, no in my circle, out of my circle, no no separation or between me and the one who I want to yell at. We were talking in our group last night. When does the rage come up? It comes up because there's someone that I want to destroy, because I fear they're going to destroy me, and they may actually destroy me. That's real. There is the necessity out of compassion to say no, but to also say no out of compassion, because I know I'm not separate. And because I know that my life is dependent on their life, as their life is dependent on mine. My life is dependent on this earth, as this earth is dependent on me. And we're not separate. So another piece of this then is that everything is God, that all is arising from the flow of divine chayut, that if I am alive, it is because God is present, God guiding God's self through me. So all takes place in God, through God, with God. I think it was Zalman who said, waking up in the morning, okay, God, how do you want to be Zalman today? No. Oh God, I'm going to tell you how I am, right? Like I have something that I could tell God that God doesn't know. Can I know what God knows for me? In that sense, from the non-dualistic theology, we also come into a relationship with insubstantiality of material things. They are lavush, they are the garment, the covering. They're necessary, but not primary. Each of us gets to have our own space to be fully who we are. We get to cover over what we need to keep private. And it's not available to everybody else. But because I can keep it private doesn't mean that it's separate from everything else. The insubstantiality of material things also says that not that I can walk through my kid or the grandkid's room and, the Lego is not going to pierce my foot. It doesn't mean that I can walk through the table, right? That's not insubstantiality of material things, but rather that they're empty, right? That they're, in the end, nothing. They are as evanescent as we are. And al tiftechu bin divim, right? Don't put your trust in the donors, because it comes and it goes. We've got new priorities, right? See you, ciao. But it also means don't put trust in the latest edition of whatever it is, right? Or in knowing what's popular. I came back from my junior year in Israel, and I went to camp, and I realized that there was something that, probably I didn't quite get, because all the kids were talking about Kung Fu. It had happened that year. I had no idea. Okay, I worked with a rabbi who, in all seriousness, I was still in rabbinical school. He has to read everything so that no one has read anything that he hasn't. Placing my person and persona and my authority rather than in the person, in this moment, in this interaction of coming into being with each other. So that leads us to then, certainly, a very important piece that has to do with sustainability in this world and environmentalism. I think I'll come back to that. Because it comes to chitzoniut and pnimiut. Right? We're all about the outside, how things look. That is American Western culture, right? It is appearances. It is, how can we market this? How can we put lipstick on this pig so that we can actually sell it? That's what it's about. And this tradition reminds us, wait, no, it's the pnimiut. It's the innerness that counts. This is has the potential, and certainly in the Hasidic tradition, still there was a degree of Puritanism with a small letter P, a sort of asceticism, a denial of embodied life, and that's not where we've taken it, nor where a considerable part of the Hasidic tradition took it. Rather, it's indeed that in everything, we can find God. Malo chol haaretz kvodo, or as I haven't found the original source yet, but the Slonim tradition fairly consistently teaches that the Maggid of Mezrich cited Psalm 104, Mal'ah haaretz kinyanecha. Right? The earth is filled with opportunities to acquire you, God. I can be koneh, I can find you, God, everywhere. But in order to do that, it's the pnimiut that I'm looking for. That's how I come into relationship with God, not through the outside. Everything is not God, but everything is a pointer to God. Moreover, recognizing the emptiness of chitzoniut and of the chitzonim, of the external forces, grounds us for living a more conscious life of global environmental attention. We're more able to resist appeals to ego needs, the work of marketing and of politics, to live and act out of consciousness, out of da'at, respect for God's creation, which is not ours, but for which we are responsible, care for others who are not like me or us, words that ultimately are of the world of Perud, of separation, rather than yichud. Attention to and loving care and investment in each individual as a unique being with a unique soul, seeking to connect to its divine purpose in this world. There is no rushing that process, as each soul has its unique capacities and needs. But as each soul comes into greater expression and finds its particular purpose in the world, It is transformational. It allows for the contribution of that Chelek HaMashiach to be contributed to the world, which that person alone can contribute. And each of us has a Chelek HaMashiach. This is at the root of our cohort work. What we can learn in class intellectually and then go out and teach as an idea is not what is needed in spiritual growth. It is not see one, do one, teach one. Rather, it is a practice of emunah. So emunah, faith, faithfulness, I spoke of that this morning. But it's emunah first with intention to then know what's happening. It's training and testing and responding to the question, what is true for you in this moment? It may start, and as it did for some of us, first meeting Sylvia Burstein, is a sense of, I'll have what she's having. But that initial inspiration has to be digested, internalized, and checked out in our own experience. Always investigating, is it true? Is it true in my experience that if I sit quietly, I can be more compassionate? If I sit quietly, I can hear others speaking differently. If I sit quietly, my body can relax and I can become fully present in the world. Is it true? Is it true? And when it is true for us, we can then respond, Amen. Faith, true and certain. Emet ve'amunah. What is being taught and what is being offered, whether a practice, an insight, or an orientation to the world. So yes, the impetus for creating the Institute was to bring these teachings to the mainstream, and it was to prepare clergy who have grounded experience, who might respond in a way that will tell a seeker, you have a home here. There is a place in the Jewish world where you can continue to deepen your spiritual life. Not, yeah, I heard about that, here's a book. We do that all the time. And sometimes it's the most effective way to help someone, but not in spiritual life. You may want to offer a book, but it has to be a book that you've read, a book that you've lived. To be able to say, oh, here's something we can do. There are certain fundamental Hasidic concepts that are tied to practice, that can be experienced day by day, moment by moment. Yetziat Mitzrayim. I am coming out of Egypt with every breath. Do not say I am leaving, I am only just arriving. Every moment I am in Egypt, and every moment I can come out. Teshuvah, not just repentance, but teshuvah in terms of transformation, in terms of change of course, in terms of reorienting to connecting to God, to being aligned, to allow for the flow. Ahavat Nirat Hashem, reclaiming and living the deep Jewish spiritual emotions of love and fear. Because this world is immensely beautiful and the world is immensely terrible. And no one gets out of this world alive. So being able to live with Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem and claim those languages and those experiences helps us live a grounded life. Chesed, Emet, Rachamim. Non-judging awareness. I'm present with what's true. As much as I don't like it, it's just what is. Can I bring chesed to it? But chesed can also be sloppy. It can be flabby. So I bring a certain amount of emet to it, a container. The dynamic of chesed and emet resolves in rachamim. Hitbatlut, right? Self-negation. There is there's a piece of clergy life which I think we have natively Jewishly, but we certainly got it also from our Christian neighbors, which can be expressed by a version of Trumpeldor's last words, right? Tov lamut ba'ad amenu. It's good to die for our people, right? I don't care. I gotta get to Minyan. I have 103. I'm still going. They need me. Right, whatever. We kill ourselves, right? But hitbatlut is also something quite different. Hitbatlut is the practice of right-sizing. Of knowing, really, who am I in this? What can I do? What should I do? What will I do? That is tied to something that I've been talking about really in the past 2 years, which I think is, it's a foreign concept, except we touched on it this afternoon just now, which is Mesirat Nefesh. Mesirat Nefesh is the nice way of talking about martyrdom. But Mesirat Nefesh is giving oneself fully without reservation. We as a people in the last century figured out how to give at the office, but not at home. How to give charity, but not ourselves. How to talk and vote and write letters to the editor, but for good reason, for a large part of the last century, not stick our necks out, not say too much or go too far, and not put ourselves on the line for anybody else because it's not clear if we're on the line. But I think that it's a very important piece in this century for us to be facing. And we can only face it when we actually have right-sized ourselves and know ourselves not as the thing, but as a part of God and a part of the unfolding. It is, it is learning when and how to have skin in the game. And partly, in light of everything I've said previously this afternoon, over 20 years, right? Right. We always have skin in the game because we're not separate. And it's not happening to them. And I can't hide. I want to make this last little piece of the difference between talking about Tselem Elohim and Meloch ha'aretz kvodo v'leit atar panui minei. Tselem Elohim is a very important concept. It's very beautiful. It is paradoxically experienced most physically during Tahara, but it's effaced when we walk around in the world because, oh yeah, Tselem Elohim, right? But not you. Tselem is only a Tselem, right? It's what they pull out of the church and walk through the streets with, right? Look. And we Pache, right? But it's at a remove. When we say Meloch ha'aretz kvodo, v'leit atar panui minei, the whole earth is filled with the God's glory and there's no place devoid of God, that means everywhere and everyone. And there is no ugliness that one can see that precludes it. There's no tselem that I can say, oh, it needs a polish. I'm not going to use that one today. Everywhere. The key to all of this, as I've touched on already, is avodah, dedicated, sustained, intentional practice. There are the formal practices of Torah and Tefillah, of course, but when we internalize the previous concepts as experience, they shape our engagement with the world, and everything becomes an opportunity for devotional practice, for bringing God into our lives, but more importantly, to make God manifest in the world. Because it's not only about my experience of God in my life. Oh, it's so beautiful. God just, oh, I feel God. It's so wonderful. All right, fine. One. It's when God is out there and I make it manifest that it matters. That's what counts. It's how we live. It's what Tikkun Midot has become. It is saying divinity is present in each one of us, and as we reveal it in ourselves, we can make it evident in the world, and we can point to it over and over again. So I've talked a long time, and we'll point to the second text in the packet, the Zera Kodesh. Naphtali of Ropshitz, 4th generation. Part of a larger piece. A lot of the time he's doing his favorite gematrias, which are not so important to us right here. But he has this incredible teaching here. He cites the Midrash, that many of you know. When God was about to give Torah on Sinai, everything fell silent. The birds didn't chirp, the cows didn't move, the dogs didn't bark. Everything fell silent, and a voice came forth saying, Anochi. Right? And also, right, the cherubim didn't chant, holy, 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 and so on. So Naphtali says, all right, so what? Right? If all of that had been going on, Kol Adonai Bakoach, Hayan Nishma, it would be heard. What are you talking about? So what? Everything fell silent. And he turns it around and he says, everything fell silent. And then everything out loud together as one said, Anochi. I am you, God. Right? It's not what we think happened at Sinai. God says, Anochi. And we say, oh, yeah, God. Now, okay, what do we say? The experience of Sinai was Panim befanim diber Elokim nachem. God spoke to you face to face. We had that intimate experience, and everything could say, yes, Anochi, I am you, God. Our practice, our purpose as the Institute has been for each of us through practice and study, through Chavershaft and Chavruta, through retreat and through our own learning, has been to cultivate our own capacity to engage with these concepts as experienced truth, to have the emunah to be able to say, Anochi, in the face of God, and hear everything that comes afterwards, telling us what we should do with that godliness, with that godness, with that divinity which we are. So yes, there is a way in which to this parched and barren world, there's no water to keep them alive. I don't think that's what we're here about. We are embodied souls. We are a chelek Eloah mimal, a portion of divinity. In order to manifest divinity, be'eretz tzia v'yavesh b'limayim, in a parched and barren world. Kein ba'kodesh chaziticha. Then we can see God. Thank you.
Any questions? Time for a few questions. Any questions, Father?
Yeah. Of course.
What's your favorite text, Jonathan?
It is the Toldo Yaakov Yosef of Chayei Sarah, with additions on the Devar Mechoar. It is when you see something ugly or in becoming another person, know that it's for your good, because God is present there, because there's no place devoid of God. And it will lead your heart to tshuva. And because you have shemetz mineh, because you have a portion of that in you as well.
Through all of these years that you've passed on these teachings and all that you have just laid out for us and explained for us, how have you been transformed by it?
question.
Over all these years, how have I been transformed by these teachings? There is, a classic spiritual image that spiritual growth and, experience and knowledge is like peeling an onion. Right? There's always another thin little layer. A plummet, in the sense of a plumb line, Marcia.
Ooh. On purpose? Did you just do that?
I thought we worked that out before.
That this line, the weight, the impact, the import, has sunk deeper and deeper, which actually means that over time, I too have gone through processes of coming to tell the truth in newer and deeper ways personally that are transformative in my life. That I understood and partially, and I still understand partially, but I would say that it is the when I turn to a sefer and read the commentary, over time, the work of translation in all of its forms has changed so that I open to the presence of the truth that's being communicated, of the whether wonder or awe or fear or love or passion or fire that is being expressed, and that is a challenge then not to leave it external, but to bring it in. Theo,
the way you describe the lineage, you are the second generation of IJS, and us are a third, that's a fourth generation. But there were various people who were there at Monomod Arts and some who didn't get it at all. It was so brand new, it was just like overwhelming. Already primed, already in your Jewish learning or your life experience, you already
right.
As one of those first generation people, there was a gap between those for whom this was entirely new,
right,
and those who were already receptive in this way or primed.
So how did it come to me? No, I give a lot of credit to Amy Eilberg, who back in the day was writing one of the weekly columns in the Jewish, whatever it was called, in Northern California. And it was always better than the other two guys. And the best were when she quoted from Iturei Torah. And not long afterwards, I got it. And where before each year or so, I would have something that I would be working through and teaching from. That was it. I could pick up Iturei Torah, and as I walked down the hill to Shul on Friday afternoon, there would be a teaching that was right there. What the benefit and the advantage of Iturei Torah is they're short generally, and God bless him, he straightens it out and turns it into Hebrew. And so the language was familiar and the teachings were familiar. I'd also done a lot of work in folklore, in Midrash. And so there was something about the idiom that just, it made sense. It took a while to get the language of Hasidut, really kind of after our first cohort. But before that, Sylvia Borstein showed up at Shul, I think 1995 or so. And soon after we started trying to make heads or tails of Nitivot Shalom, because Zalman said we should study it. But more importantly, we did a contemplative mincha or maariv, depending on the time of year. And out of our conversation and teaching with each other, I learned that, I think out of my life experience, again, growing up in the 60s, some of you know this story. I was introduced to meditation, I think, in my dentist's chair. Dr. Norman Mencken was one of the major proponents of nitrous oxide. So I learned that if you breathe deeply, you relax. But also, it's possible to feel pain and not respond, not react. So I had, whatever my life experience was, but particularly my life pastorally in the congregation, there are pieces of mindfulness that were familiar, that then what I'd been teaching now gained a grounding and a different depth of language from my work with Sylvia. So that it was preceded the Institute. I also had the opportunity and the privilege of being part of the first mindfulness leaders training program that Sylvia and Sheila and Jeff led for 35 or so of us Jewish leaders, learning mindfulness meditation to bring it into the world. You know, Michael Strassfeld, Joy Levitt, Rachel again, because she funded it, but also wanted to do it. Nancy, Amy, Jacob Staub, a variety of folks were all in that. And so that also prepared me for that, but not the Hasidut so much, except for Iturei Torah. Yeah.
So I'm curious if you see the list of Hasidut kind of value proposition practices, right? Time and Shudan, the list. Do you see that as a codified list that stops when I stop taking notes at the end of it, or is it more like, you know, we add every Mobile, like there's the Ayala, and there's Moshe Staff, and there's Rachel Weepy, and like the layers continue, right? So is the list complete at this point? Because the texts are complete.
No, this is my offering in this context about the Institute. Right, this is what I wanted, this is my download. But
it's enough, don't get me wrong, it's enough.
no. But what you're saying is that every piece of Torah that you study, but study intentionally as a spiritual text to inform and open the soul is another piece of that. Right. So,
So one of the things that's been happening lately is that people would ask you in the Rabbi, would ask you for guidance. There'd be like, what is this? Can you find for us? So one of the things that happens is that you bring, first of all, obviously you have a wonderful memory, deep experience. Well, you've got resources.
I've got
Okay,
resources.
good. You've got resources, you've got game. And so you bring this, a lot of insight. Are you ever surprised, once you have gleaned all these things, you've done your homework, you bring these resources, are you ever surprised by the conclusion that you find? There's something new that you have not seen before. Is this like,
oh my God. Yeah, always. I mean, always. I mean, it is, first of all, right, this is how much of Torah I know. Right? So I'm always learning, and it's always new for me. And it's always a delight. It's all of you, right? Everybody there, to get those questions and to have the opportunity to study and to look and to try to figure out and so on. So please, I'm still there, Jonathan, the Jewish spirituality.
really? So you are, because that's what has come up, actually. People have said, now that you're retiring, does that mean we can't ask you anymore?
No, now it's just off the clock.
That's what it is.
And I always learn, and as I have said, every teacher only learns what they know because of their students, and there's always something more to know and to learn. Yeah, Lisa.
I'm wondering with all the Hasidic texts that you translated, if there is one particular Rabbi, one particular person who is just the one that you have closest to your heart and has somehow spoken to you most deeply, and someone.
So is there one Hasidic teacher that has spoken to me most deeply, and if so, why? Again, because I don't have a great memory. They're all good. I would say this. Influenced by my teacher, Art Green, there is a certain beauty and wonder to the Maori Nine. There is certainly passion in Kedushat Levi. And if you haven't read, if you haven't gotten Art's book, Judaism for the World, and read the chapter, How I Pray or What I Pray, his concluding piece about Levi Yitzchak and Menachem Nochem of Chernobyl, the Kedushat Levi and the Maori Nine, is just tremendously opening and revealing, and it's a great, great chapter. It's unbelievable. I would also say, though, that after I put aside the tremendous misogyny and xenophobia of the Slonim tradition, I'm very moved by the Birkat Avraham, the year that I did that. Not that mystical.
So I think I know you're going to continue to translate. The question is, how do you translate?
What will I up to the end of January when I finished on the door and a phone that I could, Rabbi Slater. So, well, maybe I'll translate, because during the early part of COVID, where I was doing the Torah study, I gave myself this task of taking from Svarim that nobody reads, or few people read. And I thought that I'd go back and do them, and I may. But what I've done right now, at least for the time being, is not committed to anything, not taken on anything, I don't know. I do think that there are some folks from that third generation, the students of the Maggid, that deserve attention. Art discouraged even tackling the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, rightly. Also, to a certain extent, the more of a or Meir, which I think I still might want to get to someday. But he said that I should try to work on the Osher Divrei Emet, because it's topical, it's epistolary, and there might be something there. But right.
Back to our, can you say something about that as it's helpful, about the next generation of students, the next generation, who might not come to IJS, but
It's an important question. In light of what I had to say today, the value proposition of spirit is questioned today, not from the Wissenschaft intellect, but from the activist change position. And the challenge for any training institution is finding the way to bring the contemplative practice to the social change. And for that I do know that that certainly we've had, through the Institute, we've had an impact on HUC, both in New York especially, because that's where we've been located, but also in Los Angeles, and to a certain extent Israel. But it's its own world. JTS, very little. I mean,
Now that I,
but
yeah, the inside.
although over the past 3 or 4 years, JTS has brought in
Yeah.
and offered spiritual direction to its students. So that language is beginning to get there, but I don't know. Tony Shai, R1, was one of the early spiritual directors. Egal. A couple of other folks. Yeah.
I wonder if you speak a little bit more to what you just named, it's like the next. Frontier, like the next. Which has been very helpful in allowing me to be present and receive all the other Torah to understand that I'm seeing you model, that balance. So I feel like it would be helpful to lift the veil on that a little bit and say like,
How's it evolved for me? I mean,
well, in terms of when you name things as political, when you don't, how are you trying to address that challenge that you name?
I've been impacted with everyone else over the past 2 years. It's become much more salient for me. And the actually, in terms of anger, frustration, grief, trauma, are all there. Responding rather than reacting is where I've been trying to bring my spiritual practice is recognized. It's New York. I arrived in New York the middle of August of 2001. So September 11, 2001 took place. I volunteered in the Family Service Center on the piers. And, they were very careful about checking in with us. How are you doing a debrief? And what are you going to do? I could always say, I'm going to lead meditation, right? So I always had meditation, but I also recognized that there was a way in which that was just an out. I wanted to get out and go to do meditation. The integration of spiritual practice as a rooted spiritual experience that shapes my activism, and the activism that then informs my spiritual practice, I think is still yet to be unfolded, particularly in the Jewish world.
Okay, I think we will end here with some words of blessing from our executive director, Rabbi Josh Fagelston, and from your dear friend and cantor, Benji Ellen Schiller, recording. So give me a sec. to properly share screen
Don't forget.
with sound. With sound. Yeah, this is.
I have notes. I have notes.
Hold on. Oh, I know. I'll be with you in a moment.
Rev can, I can get
One
it.
sec. All right. All right. Okay. Okay, but we're not doing that yet.
Right.
No, we're not doing that yet.
Not yet,
Hold
Benji.
on. Not yet, Benji. Hold on.
Benjamina.
Everybody can read my email now. Let me find. It's only 571 emails. Okay. And here we go. All right. Here we go.
Bravo.
Okay. Now we are ready to screen share. Here we go. Share sound, share screen, and
opportunity to say some words of appreciation to Jonathan. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. Jonathan,
know
speaking
that.
as the executive director of IJS, there aren't sufficient words to say thank you for everything you have done for the Institute and for the rabbis and cantors and lay people we have been.
Oh, no. Well, it's my computer. It's my computer. Everyone, do it later.
Privileged to serve.
Okay.
You have.
No. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. I apologize for that, and we'll show it later. But people on Zoom will not see that right now, but I'll send you the link so you can all hear that. But I hope you will join me. Please be seated. Well, friends, friends,